As was stated earlier, all of the countries that are emerging today from under the shackles of colonialism are turning towards socialism. I don't think it's an accident. Most of the countries who were colonial powers were capitalist countries. And the last, a bulwark of capitalism today is America. And it's impossible for a white person to believe in capitalism and not believe in racism. When you find one, yes, you can't have capitalism without racism.
They're stuck in the past because, like, these people like Malcolm X, Kwame, in the past, they were Marxists.
Oh, I can't stand black people that shun our black leaders.
But those people, like, they didn't live on, they were assassinated. Like, they weren't allowed to, like, politically mature. You know what I mean?
In the process of struggling, I've also understood that part of struggling is learning, is studying. And my own experiences in the 60s led me to understand that it wasn't just enough to ask for a piece of the pie. That the whole liberation of oppressed people in the United States had to do not with climbing up some ladder to success, not for asking to be just like Rockefeller or just like DuPont or just like Ford, because that would only continue the oppression and exploitation of oppressed people in the United States, and specifically African people born and raised in the United States.
And if you find one and you happen to get that person into a conversation and they have a philosophy that makes you sure that they don't have this racism in their outlook, usually they're socialists, or their political philosophy is socialism.
We said we're not going to fight capitalism with black capitalism, but we're going to fight it with socialism.
To look up to all these rich white men. The foundation of their wealth is based off of slavery and colonialism.
The fact is that when this portrait was painted, Britain's participation in the slave trade was at its height. By the 18th century, demand for English cotton was booming. Easily washable and colourful, it was becoming the fashion fabric of choice for the middle classes and a valuable trading commodity, driving the Industrial Revolution. However, the great wealth this brought the nation was built upon enslaved labour in Britain's colonies.
They saw us planting our crops, tending our fields, and they stole us because they wanted fields planted. They wanted crops tended. You understand? This is why we were such valuable commodities on the market. Look up some of those flyers and you'll see that they even tell you on the flyers, newly arrived from this coast, know how to cultivate rice. This is what they were doing, family. They were selling you as a market commodity to get the highest price for you. This is market capitalism, and you are in the middle of a market right now. And if you don't understand that you are still in the middle of a market, then you will be sadly mistaken and walking around here calling yourself nigger and sounding as ridiculous as if you were wearing a Ku Klux Klan hat chasing black people up and down. You understand? And when you take the hood off, you black your damn self.
Modern colonialism, that is, colonialism in the so-called era of colonialism or era of imperialism, shaped many conceptions of race, class, culture, gender, and so on. Wherever Europeans went, they engaged in an unequal cultural exchange. Some of this cultural exchange, no doubt, was decided by both sides, but some was also pressed upon the lesser party by the more dominant one. Think of anti-sodomy laws, for example, introduced in various colonies by Europeans bringing with them their particular views on the intersection of morality and sexuality. European colonial domination was closely connected to the Industrial Revolution, both feeding into European ascendancy on the emerging world stage, and a concept such as a global world stage only came into being as a result of modern colonialism.
But yet, y'all want to keep talking about pulling yourself up by the bootstraps.
Modern colonialism has a direct through line of continuity to modern society. It's integral to the construction of our modern world. You cannot understand the way the world looks today without understanding colonialism. In that clip where Jordan Peterson is talking to Magata Wade, she claims Africa is not poor due to colonization. She says maybe it had an effect, she doesn't know. But she knows for sure it's not poor because of it. We divide the world by terms such as the developed world of the global north and the developing world of the global south. Africa is most definitely considered a part of the developing world and the global south. This itself is a distinction that arose from colonial relations. The global north was the colonizing imperial core, and the global south was the colonized periphery. We are still speaking of these regions in colonial terms, because the global north is still the metropole and the global south the periphery.
And so scholars, largely European scholars, those in the what we call the American School of Ethnology in the 19th century, began in earnest to reinterpret the evidence. And so there needed to be a more critical scrutiny of the biblical text. And of course, it turned out that it wasn't Ham that was cursed after all, but only Canaan. And the curse did not involve anything to do with blackness. And so over time, blackness was stripped away from the Hamitic hypothesis, and a new iteration of this theory came about, which was what you mentioned earlier, that the Hamites were Europeans after all, Caucasians from the Caucasus, that brought the civilization to enlighten the rude black peoples of Africa. And so the Hamitic hypothesis took on a new scientific spin and started being proliferated in a number of disciplines like anthropology, Egyptology, ancient history, et cetera, to now explain how civilization got to Africa in the first place. And so any kind of civilization or semblance of civilization was now the birthright or the work of pastoral Hamites from Europe, or at least in some cases from the Middle East, but not African. They brought civilization to Egypt and therefore disseminated this in the rest of Africa. So I'm going to pause here. My colleagues can probably chime in as they see fit.
This was very popular a couple hundred years ago, where it was used to justify colonialism. Because if people were supposedly primitive due to their environment, then it would be to their benefit if others who were fortunate enough to be from a superior environment came and forced upon them their more civilized ways. Whether the supposed superiority is explained as being biological or environmental, the ultimate assumption is still that Europeans are superior, and so it was pretty much just used in the same way. But Diamond's theory, despite being similar in its explanation, has a completely different goal: to provide a non-racist grand theory of history. So let's see if he succeeds in doing so.
Well, earlier this month, the Vatican formally rejected its doctrine of discovery. The papal decree, or bull, was declared centuries ago and was used to legitimize the seizure of indigenous lands, mostly in Africa and the Americas. Now, riddled with racial and religious superiority, it eventually insinuated its way into the more modern laws of the United States, Canada, and Latin America. It justified what today would commonly be judged as illegal land seizures and human rights abuses. And though it's taken centuries to repudiate, the Vatican statement says the decree has never been considered expressions of the Catholic faith. Last year, during a visit to the Canadian Arctic, Pope Francis apologized to First Nations people for the evil of the country's Catholic residential schools. Now, those schools became notorious for abuse and even murder of Canadian Indigenous children as they were forced to assimilate to white Catholic culture. Church doctrine also allowed Portugal and Spain to take territories in Africa and the rest of the Americas, and many argued it still informs government policy and laws in the United States. Here's a closer look.
The doctrine of discovery states that an explorer from a European Christian country can take ownership of any land they discover, regardless of any non-Christian inhabitants, and concede it to their home country. The papal bulls divided the world between Portugal and Spain, giving them free power, authority, and jurisdiction of every kind over all non-Christian lands. Most importantly, it gave them permission to enslave millions of people. The doctrine of discovery became a legal principle through a U.S. Supreme Court case in 1823. Two men bought same land, one purchased it from a Native American and the other from a federal government. The judge decided it did not belong to the Native American because it was never his to begin with. 65 years later, that decision was reflected in Canadian courts. The Supreme Court decided that land did not belong to Indigenous people because it became federal property when Europeans discovered it. Over hundreds of years, backed by the doctrine, precedents were set that led to the seizures of Indigenous lands and the displacement of Indigenous peoples.
I am touched by the way in which the document doesn't close the book. It doesn't attempt to say, and that's that, and we'll have no more of that. Thank you.
I began to understand that more and more the condition of my people, my history was very much connected with other oppressed people, and I began to see that the same foot that was on the necks of the Vietnamese people, that was on the necks of all oppressed people on the planet, was the same foot that was on my neck. And so I began to understand that imperialism has to go. It is a poison.
What makes them mad about it is that they had black people and white poor people and red poor people and Puerto Rican poor people and Latin American Puerto Rican people of poor people of all descents. They had them caught up in their movements based on racism when the Black Panther Party stood up and said that we don't care what anybody says. We don't think you fight fire with fire best, we think you fight fire with water best. We're going to fight racism, not with racism, but we're going to fight with solidarity. We said we're not going to fight capitalism with black capitalism, but we're going to fight it with socialism. We stood up and said we're not going to fight reactionary pigs and reactionary state's attorneys like this and reactionary state's attorneys like Hanrahan with any other reactions on our part. We're going to fight their reactions where all of us people are getting together and have an international proletarian revolution. Right on. Right on. And that's saying all power to the people. Right on. That's saying that no matter what color you are, there's only two classes. And that's saying there's a class over here and there's a class over there. And the reason that this class over here has never did anything to get this class off its back, because this is lower, this is upper, this is the oppressed, this is the oppressor, this is the exploited, this is the exploiter. And these people in this class have divided themselves. They say, I'm black and I hate white people. I'm white and I hate black people. I'm Latin American and I hate hillbillies. I'm hillbilly and I hate Indians. So we fight amongst each other. And you've heard the testimony of pigs here. You got pigs of all colors, you know that. You got pigs that are white, you got pigs that are black, you even got pigs that are black and white. Propagating the same type of madness that this buffoon Hanrahan would be propagating if he were here himself. And why? Because they want to keep you to believing that I'm your enemy. And that everybody else that's black and that wears a lot of hair on his head and hair on his face, they want to keep you thinking that he's your enemy. Why? Because if ever you would disregard him and overlook him just for a minute and throw away that question of racism and start into dealing with a little logic, then there would be no one else you could attack other than Hanrahan, other than Davy, and other than Tricky Dicky Nixon. If you make the right decision, then the oppressed people of the world get complete satisfaction. I know you return a verdict of not guilty. Thank you.
If they can get all of these free benefits of a society, if they can live in a socialist society where they don't have to worry about food, healthcare, or education funded by our dollar, then why is it a problem for it to happen in America? Well, the problem is you don't want black people to benefit from that.